All right, so here's something that kind of sits in the mid-range of sort of not just skill level, but technical light painting, and that is the use of manual lenses. So what is a manual lens? Well, if you're reasonably new to photography, kind of like I am, 10 years, you probably don't remember a time when lenses had manual aperture. Now, the aperture in a lens is the hole that opens and closes inside the lens to restrict or open up the amount of light hitting the sensor. Now, the vast majority of lenses that we buy today on automatic cameras, whether they are film cameras or mirrorless cameras or DSLRs, they have automatic aperture. So you tell the camera what aperture you want, whether that's f5.6, f8 or f9, and then when you press the button, it closes the aperture down to the value that you've told it. So if it's f8, it'll go, you press the button, it goes, closes the aperture down and takes the exposure and lets the amount of light in that you want. There are some advantages to adjusting the aperture manually, and I'm going to show you an amazing example now here in the studio, but also then we're going to go outside and I'm going to show you an example out there. On a lens we have a focus ring and we have an aperture ring on a manual focus lens. Now this lens is a Samyang lens. I've put it on, it's a micro four third lens, so I've put it onto my micro four third Olympus EM1 Mark III in this instance. But the cool thing about a lot of camera systems is that you can buy pretty cheap manual aperture lenses. So if you have a Canon camera, you can buy an old school manual lens. Maybe you might need an adapter. I know Nikon have lots. Nikon are quite renowned for having manual aperture lenses. But what it allows you to do is, while an exposure is happening, there's a dial on here that you can turn, and that adjusts the aperture. So thinking back to our very first sort of couple of videos, and we were talking about how the aperture in our light painting controls the effective brightness of a tool. So if we have a blade that's really bright and it's blowing out parts of the image, what do? Well, we change the aperture, we close it down and let less light in. Our exposure time takes care of the surroundings, but remember our exposure triangle. So there's a few instances in light painting where we might want to use a manual aperture on the lens. One of them is, and I've done this quite a few times, is I'll be out in the wild, say under a full moon, and I've got a blade or a tool that's very bright, but I want to get that full moon look. So I use the blade, I put the aperture onto a setting where I know the blade is correct. So say f8. In this example we're about to do now, I know the blade is f8. So I put it on f8, I do the blade, and then rather than waiting for 6 or 7 minutes for the moonlight to illuminate the scene, I go back to the camera while it's still taking the exposure and I adjust the aperture out to f2.8. Lets a lot more light in, and then 2 or 3 minutes later we have the whole moonlit scene, and we'll do that out in the wild. But what I'm going to do here to demonstrate it here in the studio is this, and it's cool because I get to introduce you to a new tool, and that tool is electroluminescent wire. So we call it EL wire, and what it is it's basically a string, and it lights up. So I'll turn it off and I'll turn it on. So this is 1 meter. You can get it in all sorts of different lengths. It is beautiful, and you'll see the effect it makes. You get that sort of smoky effect with it on the ground. It's great for portraits. I recently had a bit of a play with getting this in the water. Not the whole thing, not the controller and everything, but putting it in the water, and it's just beautiful. Now, a couple of things about electroluminescent wire. Like a lot of things, when we think about torches or bits and pieces, they come in varying quality and brightness in bits and pieces. Now, this particular stuff I'm using here is from EL Wirecraft in the UK, and it's expensive. There's no way around that. I have tried to source stuff as good and as bright as this from elsewhere, but on eBay or Alibaba, AliExpress, you can buy EL wire 1 meter lengths for literally $5 or $6, and it is fine. If you find it's not bright enough, you just crank the ISO and we'll get it going. I may even find, I couldn't find any of my cheap stuff, but I have boxes of it. But this is great. So even for this example here, it's perfect. So here's what we're going to do. Let's get into it. So one of the things, now I'll just make sure, yep, good. So there's a few things with these manual lenses. One of them is that they don't have any autofocus. Now in this instance, and this one is very, very wide. It's a 10 mil, so it's equivalent to 20 millimeters. So in this image, we're seeing a lot of the room, but that's okay for the purpose of this exercise. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. We've got the EL wire, which is pretty dim. It's not very bright, but I want to mix it with this tool, say. Now this is a blade, and it's extremely bright. Of course, you know, as you know by now, we can adjust the power, but for the purpose of this exercise, I want to use that. So the blade's very bright, and the EL wire is very dim. Okay, so how do we decide what settings we want to be at? Well, let's go through it. So I want to be at 30 seconds because that'll give me enough time to do what I want to do. So go out with one of the tools, come back, adjust the aperture, and then go out with the other tool and do that bit of light painting and come back. So 30 seconds is going to give me plenty of time. It's dark enough in here that that'll be fine. So what we want to do is, first of all, we do some tests to decide what aperture works for each tool. Now, yep, you can just trust me that I've done a test, and f8 is the aperture that works for this. Now I'll show you what happens if we stay at f8 and try and do the electroluminescent wire. Alrighty, let's get into it. I'm not sure if all cameras are the same, but peaking, I don't get any peaking. I don't get any peaking using this manual lens. So what I tend to do with these is I use the manual focus on the front. I use the gauges, and I can see out here that things are pretty sharp when I'm at infinity. So I'm just going to set this lens at infinity and it'll be fine. So you want to make sure that you focus up. Let's get the lights off and let's get going. So I'm going to do a 30-second exposure at f8. I'll check that it's at f8. All right, and I'm just going to open the shutter. 2-second delay. Now I'm going to do a bit of blading across the scene. Whoa, nothing fancy, just getting some light painting in there. All right, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to grab the electroluminescent wire. All right, so stretch that out. Oh, where's my button? There it is. All right, I'm going to zoom across the ground with that. We'll make it a bit smoky. And we'll turn it off and come back and have a look. Now, here's something interesting. So if we... Okay, so here's our image. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so what we can see a little bit of the wall over the back there. The blade looks fine. It's not overexposed at all, but bummer, we cannot see the electroluminescent wire at all. So what aperture do we need to be at to make the electroluminescent wire work? Let's try f2.8. Now, a couple of tips with EL wire. This particular one has a button here that starts it. So you can see here, you can either temporarily hold it or press it once and it holds it on. It's very delicate stuff, this. There's nothing worse, I hate seeing at workshops, than people just holding it like this and flinging it around. EL wire, I hold it just where it joins, the wire joins the connector, and I'm very delicate with it, flicking it around. You've got to be delicate with this stuff. Okay. So we know that f2.8, well, I think f2.8 is what works for the EL wire. So let's do a 30-second exposure at f2.8. Here we go, same thing. Bit of blading. I haven't changed the power of the blade, so we'll pop that back. I'll grab the EL wire. And let's do the EL wire. Same thing, approximately the same movement. And let's see what happens. And our image should pop up soon. Okay. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so this is very bright electroluminescent wire, but taking a look at the image, I don't like, yeah, so zooming in and taking a look, that's an interesting thing, we're actually out of focus as well, but that's okay. For the purpose of this exercise, we can see that the blade is really blowing out and over hot. Now, I'm just going to refocus. Okay, I think that's about right. But you still get the idea. Okay, so the problem is, so let's take a look at those two images. So the problem is that this one here at f2.8, the blade is too overexposed, and this one where the blade is perfectly, we cannot see the EL wire. So what our solution is we know what our two target f-stops are. One of them is f8 and one's f2.8. So here's another trick with manual aperture lenses. Now, I'll put my microphone right near it and see if you can hear the clicks. Okay, when you change each f-stop, there's a click. And I know between f2.8 and f8 is 5 clicks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there we are at f8. So what that means is when you're in the dark or you're outside or everything's off, you don't want to be turning a torch on and having to look at this because it'll affect the image. So we know where the ring is because we get used to that. And I can just come up and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're at f8. So here's the process. We start the exposure, we go out, we do the blading at f8, then we come back, we change to f2.8, and we use the EL wire. And when we go outside, you'll see this is even more amazing, especially under a full moon. Okay, here we go. So lights out. We're at f8. Just make sure that my wire is there, ready for me to grab. Excellent, okay. So here goes, 30 seconds, 2-second delay, and a bit of blading, same sort of movement. Okay, and then we come over, I've got my EL wire, we come over to the lens, hopefully we'll get all this done in 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to f2.8. Here we go, I might miss it. I might have been too slow, let's go. Yeah, here we go. I wonder if I might have been a bit slow, we might have needed a little longer. Oh no, that's all good. Wow, there we go. Absolutely exactly what I was looking for. So let's hit play. Oops, got a laces come undone, safety. Okay, let's press play. Awesome, so what do we got here? It looks great. So we've got an image here where our EL wire is perfect and our blade is perfect. Now, full disclosure, it might take you 3, 4, 5 images to get this right, to decide what exposure you want for one tool and what for the other one. It might take a little while to get that right, but what happens, and this happens quite a lot and it happens to me all the time, is I just know now that at ISO 200, using this lens and this camera, f2.8 is about right for all of my electroluminescent wire. And f8 is pretty safe for most blades, and then you just tweak from there. Now when we go out into the wild and we're under a full moon, what we'll be doing there is we might use we'll use just a tool, one tool, but then we want to soak up the atmosphere, so we'll have a bit of a play with that. So there you go, that's those are manual lenses. So the things to remember, you're going to need to do manual focusing. You need to get used to what clicks work on the dial. Yeah, and be careful and play. You know, as I've been saying to you, and as I always say, whether that's a pleasing image or not, it's just another tool to put in the tool case. It's another thing to remember for when you get into those tricky moments where you can't get the shot. This may be the way that you do it. All right. I hope you enjoyed this visit to the School of Light. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll be adding videos all the time. Head over to the light painting tool shop at the website. There's a huge array of tools I've made there for you to take on your light painting journey. Peace.